Hi, this is the Cat's Library. I'll be your librarian today. Getting back to these. We'll just have to see how many videos I can get out this month. I'm going to aim for 3, but I'm not sure how busy I'm going to be over the holidays. Okay? Engage Speed Paint. Walruses are Arctic marine mammals that are split into Pacific and Atlantic subspecies. It is theorized that their name is a mix between whale and horse in the Old Norse language, or Dutch for shore giant. Walruses tend to weigh between 800 and 1,700 kilograms, or 1,800 and 3,700 pounds, and 20% of that is the skin and blubber. The skin/blubber can be as much as 6 inches or 15 centimeters thick. Atlantic walruses are slightly smaller and have shorter tusks. I'm drawing a Pacific walrus. The tusks are used for fighting and for pulling the walrus out of the water or in holes in the ice. The whiskers are used in foraging and are longer on captive individuals and shorter on wild ones. In the wild, walruses live 20 to 30 years. It takes a few years for them to reach maturity. Gestation takes 15 to 16 months. They are migratory animals. Migration patterns depend on the subspecies. In late spring and early summer, Pacific walruses traverse the Bering Strait from the Bering Sea to the Chukchi Sea. I had heard of the Bering Sea, but I hadn't heard of the Chukchi. Apparently it is in the southern Arctic and north of the Bering Strait. All of these places are between Alaska and Siberia. There are studies that walruses can dive underwater exceeding 500 meters, 1,600 feet, but they prefer to stay in shallower water to hunt. They tend to like small squishy things like worms and mollusks and clams. Apparently they suck the clam straight out of the shell. There are rare instances of them eating seals, narwhals, and seabirds, and scavenging from whale carcasses. Orcas and polar bears are the only animals who are the natural predators of walruses. Both of them have a hard time effectively hunting walrus and tend to go for the calves. Calves like baby walrus, not calves as in legs. Walruses don't have legs. Orcas have a bit of an easier time than polar bears. People are also a natural predator of walruses. They were a staple of the Chukchi, Yupik, and Inuit tribes. The tribes used the walrus meat to last through the winter, made tools out of the bones and tusks, carved the tusks, used the oil for their lamps, and made waterproof clothes from the intestinal lining. Europeans also hunted walruses up to the 50s and nearly drove them to extinction. In the modern day, the native tribes are the only ones allowed to hunt walrus. I started with a color sketch again. Sort of looks pretty goofy. Then I put in a red pencil sketch with an emphasis on the planes. Then I went into the flat colors. Walruses don't have too complicated of anatomy. With the flat colors, I put in a variety of tans and browns and then blended some of it out with a blend brush so that I could have more control over which colors were blending into. It was also a textured blend brush, so I got a bit of preliminary fur texture. Then I got a big pencil brush to add a bunch of color variation and shading, and then copied and slightly displaced the layer and also set it to a highlight layer. It was at this point that I realized that I flipped the canvas and then set it back. Then I started shading the walrus, specifically the underbelly closest to the ground and the bigger or deeper wrinkles. Then I went through and sketched out the smaller wrinkles. I was paying attention to how the wrinkles looked in the reference and how they followed the form of my drawing. This was another case where I copied the layer in order to make a highlight layer specific to the wrinkles. I also put in a darker layer in places like the face, where the fur color of the reference was dark. Then I put the overall highlight layer to the body and added even more wrinkles. Finally, I started on the tusks. Midway through, I realized that I drew one of the front legs too wide and put some more layers so that it wasn't overlapping with the tusk. Then I tried to shade the tusks with some spiraling lines. Then I did some more tweaks and zeroed in on the face. I was trying to have the face the most in focus and other elements of the illustration to be a bit less rendered. I did 2 low opacity layers with multiple colors, one soft shading bright orange layer that I set to low opacity, and then a hard shading layer and a hard highlight layer. All of these I set to a sort of mid opacity so that the underlying colors would show through. Then I drew in the eye and the whiskers and the lip divot things, and somehow all of that made the head look really, really good. I think I've done this enough that I've started to streamline my process or something. I put in some more color variation throughout the body to match the head, and moved on to the snout. I positioned the walrus smaller in the frame so that I had to make up stuff, not necessarily on purpose, but I'm pretty sure it turned out okay. So I found some stories about walruses, but I didn't really like any of them. So for the first time in the series that I know of, I am going to go rogue and make something up. Hope you enjoy. Note, I didn't know what I wanted to do for this. I started out with a fairy tale, then started outlining an over-the-top tropey fantasy romance novel, and then I started writing a full scene. It is very cheesy, but I enjoyed writing something that I didn't have high expectations for. I think I get writer's block the most when I tell myself I have to write something great when I'm still in the brainstorming and working stuff out section. So at least I had fun. Long ago in the even more lost city of Pacifica, that was like totally better than Atlantis because no one had even heard of it. And like everyone knows about Atlantis. Like it's supposed to be lost, but like how can you be lost when everything knows about it? Yeesh. Yeah, there lived a mermaid named Umi. She was the daughter of a low-ranking noble in the royal court, a dolphin mermaid, and fairly happy with her life. One day, she was out on the equivalent of a fox hunt with her friends. They ventured farther and farther out into the coral reef, and then into the ocean. They lost track of time and started heading back just before sunset. The teens were swimming as fast as they could, but they still got caught out in a terrible storm. Umi got separated from the rest and swept up north. If this was a movie, I'd show a couple shots of her struggling and then fast forward to after the storm, where Umi inexplicably didn't drown. She is dolphin human. She have lungs and need air. Anyway, she finds herself waking up in an unfamiliar place, incredibly cold place. Umi knew which direction the current had pulled her and looked at the shadows and sun to start heading south. Unbeknownst to her, she was about 20 minutes from the border of the Arctic Ocean Kingdom and the military/government outposts, though still within her kingdom's border. However, she was several days away from Pacifica, especially from being exhausted by hunting all day and swimming all night. A little into the way, she came across a lone walrus in her path. She stopped, letting out a startled stream of bubbles. The walrus blinked in complete deviousness. Umi tried to swim around the walrus. The walrus nonchalantly blocked her way. She tried to get past a few more times with increasing franticness, while the walrus continued to use minimal effort. In a moment of panic, Umi drew her sword. Whoa, Nelly, go easy on the walrus. She immediately spun around. The person who had surprised her was a tall walrus soldier merman. He was completely still and smiling bemusedly. bemusedly. Even though her blade had gouged a shallow cut into his neck that had made an almost imperceptible swirl of pink in the water. She eased up slightly, out of shape. He was wearing some sort of snorkel device, which also had a speaker that glowed bright pink whenever he talked. "What is that?" she murmured to herself. She spoke in high-pitched clicks and bubbles underwater. He frowned. He could clearly see how tired and scared she was, and could deduce that she probably wasn't thinking clearly, and was less likely to be a spy. He reached behind him and handed her a bronze emergency respirator that was attached to his oxygen tank. She waved him away and began swimming upwards. Each swish of her tail got weaker and weaker from her exhaustion. The walrus merman slowly followed behind her. Umi ran out of energy just before she reached the surface. She hung limply in the water and watched resentfully as the soldier floated up to her. He held out the respirator. She grabbed it and practically flung it into her face. She panicked for a moment because no air was coming, but the walrus man gently put his hand on her shoulder. She froze and stared at him wide-eyed. He smiled reassuringly. He delicately readjusted the respirator and accidentally brushed his finger over her frigid cheek. She started to sink slightly, and he wrapped an arm around her to support her upper back and decisively pressed the button at the top of the device, allowing oxygen to flow into her body. She quietly began to cry, insignificant tears merging into the infinite drops of an uncaring ocean as the weight of every drop seemed to press on her shoulders. The merman noticed this and gently tugged her upwards. The sky was overcast, and different shades and altitudes of clouds swirled around each other like orcas circling a wounded seal. At the same time, the mid-morning light painted the cliffs and beach and evergreen trees in a pale yellow light, tall and colorful, and desaturated all at the same time. Umi's initial thought was that the unfamiliar nature was judging her for her frivolity, but that all fell away as she was engrossed in the majesty of her new surroundings. Then Umi realized that her rescuer had been treading water for the both of them. She began kicking the water with her fins, and he let go of her. She pushed some wet hair out of her face. "I'm Lady Umi of House Lanai, of the Kingdom of Pacifica, and I'm very lost, if you would believe it. That there was a storm, and if I cross your border, you guys' border, I'm really sorry, it was an accident." The Arctic merman unhooked his respirator and speaker and let it swing around his neck. He had very long incisors that didn't quite pass his chin, while his upper lip was dusted with a sort of blonde, sort of brunette mustache. "You're on the right side of the border. I just had a gut feeling that something was wrong. We probably should head to shore. We need to get you, your ladyship, in front of a fire or space heater or something." They began swimming towards the cliff. The indifferent walrus from earlier popped up a little bit ahead of them, as if to check on them, and then dove back under the water. "I'm Sergeant Lawrence, by the way." "Pleasure making your acquaintance, Sarge." And that should be it for today. I did find some animals for the next video, but I just felt like drawing a fox. Foxes are some of my favorite animals, and I draw them quite frequently. So if it doesn't turn out well, I don't know what to say for myself. See you when I see you. Bye!